Hey everyone, welcome back. Last time we were taking a look at some of the socio-historical components that have led to postmodernism, and I wanted to continue that thought by taking a look at Alberto Giacometti. And what we see with him is he's coming out of World War II, this environment that we were taking a look at last time, and it starts to shape the way that he sees the world, and it starts to impact his art. And so I want to take a look at him in close detail as one of the leading voices that brings about this new standard of beauty. Influenced by the Holocaust and how humanity repeatedly tries to exterminate entire races of people, he had great fears about our future, believing that we are on the brink of extinction. Thus, his sculptures reveal frail, hauntingly thin forms. His works undertake the postmodern world's challenges with such things as nuclear holocaust, biological and chemical warfare, diseases such as cancer, AIDS, Ebola, etc., environmental issues such as global warming and pollution. He captures our fears of tomorrow while displaying a muted hope in the future, right? So taking a look at those ideas, those apocalyptic themes that seem to overshadow this post-World War II era that we're living in. And this is what his art looks like. As he was creating his art in the aftermath of World War II, he just realized that his art kept getting thinner and thinner, right? What we see here with the walking man is that he's less interested in creating the visual reality of a person, right? It still has some of the semblances of a person. We still see the nose and the ears and the eyes, the arms and the legs, right? But it's not necessarily a realistic portrayal per se, right? And this is a good representation of where the art world is going. It's not necessarily supposed to be representational. It's supposed to be more about the ideas, and that's something that we saw with Dadaism, right? Dadaism begins the discussion that maybe art can be more about ideas than a physical reference or a representation of the exterior world. What we also see within this is a different reference to beauty, right? This is not necessarily something pretty, but it does represent the beauty of ideas and the beauty of the human experience. What he indicates here with his thin form is that humanity in the aftermath of World War II, and we still kind of have this today, right, in the 21st century, that we're bordering between existence and extinction. We're not quite alive, but we're not quite dead either, right? So we're kind of somewhere oddly in between, right? As we take a look at most people in the world today, right, particularly in the United States, most people focus more on survival than actually living, right? And a way that we can think about this within the academic setting is most of the time when people ask on campus, right, about your major, they always ask, what are you going to do with that, right? And we never really ask, what are you going to be with that, right? That's a totally different kind of question. And generally when we say, what do you want to do with that, right? What's going to be your means of survival? How are you going to get money? How are you going to get a roof over your head? Are you going to get food, right? We're just thinking about the basic needs of survival. So perhaps what World War II is mainly cause us to regress into this survival state. And I think that Giacometti captures that beautifully. Here's some of the statistics of the 20th century. 123 million deaths were brought about due to war, and 262 million deaths were by innocent people, or were innocent people that were killed by their governments, right? And this is including the Holocaust, but also much, much more. And so, by and large, the 20th century was the bloodiest century of human existence, right, in our history. And sadly, the 21st century is on track to eclipsing those numbers. And so getting a sense that we have this propensity, these dark desires, as Freud mentions, to kill one another, right? To be violent towards one another. And we see elements of that here. But within that darkness, right, we see the kind of the bumpiness on the skin, right? This individual is going to be kind of wasting away. Within that darkness, there is this sense of hope, right? That this is the walking man. It's not the sitting down man. It's not the giving up man. Even though we are on this metaphoric brink of extinction, we need to get up and we need to carry on. And this is me at the Art Institute of Chicago a couple of years ago, standing next to one of his walking men, giving you a sense of the context of size. But what really influenced Giacometti was the Holocaust survivors, right? The people that were coming out of the concentration camps, and they were thin, hauntingly frail, right? Kind of wasting away due to the poor decisions of the Nazis, putting them in there, starving them to death, not really thinking about their humanity, right? And Giacometti is deeply concerned with what we can do to other individuals. But what he was also doing within his art is he's inspired by these Holocaust survivors, that they didn't give up hope, right? They faced these dire, inhumane, beyond our ability to truly comprehend these conditions, and yet they continued to move on. They continued to go forward, and he's inspired by stories of individuals that, giving their small portion of bread for a day, there'd be stories of people that would get up and go to the other side of the camp to give someone else their small ration who needed it more than them, right? So these harrowing accounts that happen within the Holocaust, right? These individuals are an inspiration to Giacometti, as well as they're an inspiration to all of us about how to keep going in the midst of conflict and adversity. And again, the part of what's kind of overshadowing him is the atomic bomb, right? What's overshadowing a lot of this post-World War II era is this thought that within 15 minutes all life on Earth could be dead, right? Within an instant, and the idea that we are sadistic enough to actually do something this crazy. I wanted to show you a clip from known as Bert the Turtle, and they would show this to school children about how to protect yourself in the event of an atomic bomb. And this was supposed to protect children, right? This idea that's called duck and cover.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover.
This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated.
And so what we see within this, and then they go through within the we further watched the rest of the video. They'd go through children, telling them what they need to do is they need to get duck underneath their desks at school and cover in order to protect themselves from a nuclear explosion, right? Which is totally absurd, right? There's no way that's going to protect you for anything. But to give people a sense of security that, well, maybe there is something that I can do to protect myself. But it also left this lasting national collective trauma on people that the bomb could be anywhere at any given time, right? And so people were constantly concerned about this nuclear explosion that was just imminent, right? That felt it was imminent. And so this overshadows much of the post-war era, right? The second half of the 20th century. And we think about, right, the Holocaust as kind of the hallmark of humanity's ability to destroy life, right? And but the Holocaust was not the end of the story, right? We see this as a reoccurring theme, right? Here we see the deaths in Cambodia with 2 million people dying there, and here's just their skull and bones Here you see another image. This comes from a Bosnian genocide, another 200,000 that have died. The Rwanda genocide with 800,000 people dying. So again, this is a major theme of the 20th century, this idea of genocide, this idea of killing other people. We saw this with Picasso's Guernica, where the Basque people were put to death because they didn't have these political beliefs that Francisco Franco wanted them to have. And so you see that this is this kind of violent tendency within Giacometti's work. But again, there's also this kind of brilliant and beautiful hope within them, right? That we need to transcend these violent tendencies and be able to move forward, to walk forward to a new and a better future. And I like to compare these two images, right, of a representations of humanity between Michelangelo's David, which was the typical type of a hero for the Renaissance, someone that had physical strength and determination, being able to defeat the Goliath, and also intellectual strength, being able to write poetry in the arts and become a good leader. And I want to juxtapose that with the walking man, right? A new representation of the modern, humanity. And so what we see within them is a couple of ideas that are very interesting, right? Some similarities and differences, right? One of the major similarities is they're both representations of what a hero is, right? David is a representation of a hero who's a man of God, a man of faith, right? A man of strength and intellect that's able to overcome his giant, right? His Goliath. What we see with Giacometti is this is more of a representation of an average type person, but still having the same kind of adversity, still having the same desire to move forward despite his metaphoric Goliath, the challenges that he faces. And so what we see is that it's a different representation of what the hero is within the Renaissance and within the second half of the 20th century. What we also see between them is the difference between ideals of beauty. Right, with the Renaissance, what we see is the ideal of beauty is something that supposed to look very realistic, supposed to get the muscle structure, as you can see with the abdomen and the pecs, right? You can see the bone structure in the shoulders and then the wrists and the knees, right? Trying to get the anatomy just right? So Michelangelo was trying to recreate that visual reality. With Giacometti, it's not about that, right? There's a different kind of emphasis that we see within his art. His art is not about trying to get the anatomical proportions correct. It's about trying to represent about this other type of experience of the human condition, that we're bordering between life and death, and how do we face those kind of obstacles. And so different ideals, right? So, but I want to suggest that even though Giacometti's image isn't pretty, right? Michelangelo's is pretty, universally pretty, right? People walk into this and they're immediately floored when they go to Florence in the art academy. But right, when we take a look at Giacometti's, most people initially say that's ugly, right? That's an ugly image. Why would anyone do something like this? But as we start to dig a little bit deeper and see what Giacometti is actually representing, that beauty might be more than just skin deep. That there might be more ideas, there might be more to the human condition than just judging things based on physical appearance. That there might be ideas and hope and inspiration and aspirations that are embedded within. And so as we take a look at these, they're a good representation of the differences between the eras, right? A lot of people take a look at Giacometti's and Walking Man and say, well, why can't it look like David? And I think what Giacometti would argue is, we're not living in the Renaissance. We're living in a world where we can be extinct in 15 minutes, right? We're living in a world where we're not sure whether there's going to be a tomorrow. And so trying to express that, right? Art always reflects the culture that it's in. This art is not reflecting, right, the same ideals of the Renaissance because it's not living in the Renaissance, right? Michelangelo's David is a perfect representation of what the Renaissance was concerned with. And I would argue that Giacometti's is a perfect representation with what postmodernism is concerned with. And so something to think about as we think about our art appreciation, that the idea of prettiness or the idea of beauty needs to correlate to the culture in which it was created in its understanding, right? Here's a couple other images. I came across these images when I was in LA, Tall Figure 2 and 3. Similar ideas that we see with the walking man. I like this quote by Giacometti. He says, "Every time I complete a work, I fail. But in this failure, I am compelled to try over and over again." And I think that captures that hope of the walking man. Even though it captures these darker themes of human existence and its extinction, there is that desire that maybe we can get it right? Maybe we need to figure out how to combat those violent tendencies that we have, and maybe we need to think about the morality of the capabilities that humanity has as far as with our weaponry, right? But again, these kind of things seem to kind of come back again and again. And now in the 21st century, we have again attacks against Jewish people, we have attacks against Muslims, we have attacks, these kind of religious divides that we're still struggling with. And so I think we have to address this problem, right? That Giacometti is trying to create that awareness of what can happen when we embrace those darker tendencies. But if we just don't really confront them, we just kind of sweep them under the rug, or just think of them as kind of passive, or just kind of passing moments, or become dismissive of them, they start to really spread. And this one happened in Germany. There's been occasions that have happened in Colorado and around the United States. These elements are starting to surface again, these deep kind of animosity, this kind of tribalism that seems to be part of the human condition, that we need to explore what that is, and to try to fight against those dark tendencies as we begin to move forward, as the walking man suggests. Let's take a look at abstract expressionism. And this one is generally a hard one for people to be able to get their minds around, to be able to appreciate. And I wanted to spend some time examining what's happening with abstract expressionism, why their art looks the way it does. Abstract expressionism has roots that date back before World War II, with Kandinsky and Picasso's abstract arts, trying to move away from that visual reality. These artists asserted that beauty in art should no longer be merely about mirroring the exterior world, because you have photographs and cameras to be able to do that. It should be about demonstrating insights that artists have about their world, right? So a different kind of emphasis. Surrealism also influenced abstract expressionism with its focus on representing inner thoughts, right? So the idea is, rather than representing the exterior world, they're going deep within the mind, right? So try to understand what's going on underneath the surface. And if we can understand that better, maybe we can try to avoid some of these destructive tendencies that we have. Pollock asserts that art is about the inner world. Unlike surrealists, though, abstract expressionist art is entirely void of visual reality, because the inner world of emotions have no exterior reference. And so where Dali represents like melting clocks, or swans reflecting elephants, where we can actually see that, it looks different than our visual reality because it's more dreamlike. Abstract expressionism generally has no exterior reference, and so there's not going to be any smiley faces or images that we can like discern, like trees or sunshine, something in there. And what they're arguing is that we feel before we think, right? Is that you're having a little baby, an infant. That baby does not think in complete sentences. It just feels hungry. It feels tired. It feels, right? And then, right, the thoughts come later. And so they're really trying to get at what's underneath the surface of those thoughts, so that we can perhaps, correct those, or maybe understand those, to avoid the actions that come later. And in the church, we say that our thoughts become, right, those actions. And so if they can understand the emotions that lead to the thoughts, then maybe they can understand the actions. Furthermore, they build upon the ideas of Carl Jung by promoting the idea that within their individual psyche lies universal truths, or a collective unconscious. And so what they believe is that if we can understand the inner psyche, then maybe we can understand common truths common concerns, common struggles that we all have. And in that, we can start to find truth. And we can find that truth. Maybe we can start to correct some of these negative human behaviors. Hence, their art is a process to discover truth that is common to everyone. Most works are not about the final product per se, but they are more about the act of arriving at the final product in what art critic Harold Rosenberg calls action painting. So it's not necessarily about telling the truth like Rembrandt's Bathsheba or his Prodigal Son or something where it's just kind of about the end product. This is about a discovery, right? A discovery of the artist, and the artist is inviting you in to discover as well. Let's take a look at Willem de Kooning. We've examined some of him to a certain extent when we covered Betsy, right? He's the artist that inspired the individual to train Betsy to paint. Born in the Netherlands and arrived in the U.S. in 1926, he was part of the Federal Art Project in 1935 and was paid $23.86 per week, an equivalent to about $300, about $300.50 now. Initially, he was reluctant to exhibit his art, but Peggy Guggenheim, a wealthy art patron, encouraged and helped him to develop confidence as an artist. And so again, these two main forces that are causing New York to become the center of the art world, right? The WPA and Peggy Guggenheim. We have this idea of funding art, and those funds help to create this world of culture and development in New York City. He later took a teaching job at Black Mountain College in North Carolina, along with other artists like John Cage and Joseph Albers, and later taught at Yale. His works balance between being finished and unfinished, right? This product of arriving at something. To abstract expressionists, works were not about completion, but about the journey to discover, right? Art should be living and continuous with no fixed ends. Art is a process of creation, right? So they're inviting us into that process. And I just want to show you a work that he did when he was 17 to show you that indeed he could, right, paint, he could draw, right? He could do visual reality, but he's choosing not to, right? And so a better question than "this is ugly," right? Or or better comment is, why in the world would an artist choose to represent this the way he does, right? And so I think that's a better kind of thought process to enter into, rather than "this is ugly, I don't like it." Think about what's going on. Why is the artist doing this, right? And that's going to take a little bit more context, and postmodern art is going to take more work on our part to try to understand what's going on with it, right? If art reflects our world, and our world is chaos and confusion, as we see with Revelation and with the Wilford Woodruff quote that I read to you, but we also see that with the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust and the amount of genocide that's happened throughout our culture, right? So we have this chaos, confusion, this violence that surrounds us. And art reflects that, right? What should art look like? How should beauty be defined in our age? And in some ways, I would pose the question, is this not a perfect representation in some ways of that, right? Willem de Kooning said this. He says, "The attitude that nature is chaotic and the artist puts order into it is a very absurd point of view, I think. All that we can hope for is to put some order into ourselves." And so that represents this idea of what do we expect artists to do, but it also suggests that what he's trying to do is he's trying to find out what's going on within himself, right? And if he can understand that, maybe because we have these universal thoughts, according to Carl Jung, maybe we can come to understand ourselves as he's journeying to understand himself. The title Gotham News is a reference to New York City, which is busy, crowded, teeming with life, kind of sometimes violent, right? But exciting, colorful, energetic, right? And this is kind of the metaphor for his work, right? But again, it has no external reference point. There's no, representation of the Empire State Building, right, or some type of apartment buildings. It's just an experience. Rather than trying to create reality, they're trying to create the experience of reality, right, which is a different kind of mindset than the Renaissance. The Renaissance wanted to represent what something is. What the abstract expressionists are trying to do is to represent the emotion, the ideas that are associated with it, right? So it's a different kind focus. And it's kind of interesting that he used newspapers. He's using this mixed medium within his art, and you can kind of see there is a newspaper article about a new film that came out called To Catch a Thief by Alfred Hitchcock that he includes in the painting and kind of paints over it and gives it this kind of chaotic, vibrant type of feel to it. Let's take a look at Jackson Pollock. He's generally the kind of preeminent abstract expressionist that people tend to think of, and he's also one that people tend to criticize the most. And so let's take a look at his art head on and see what he's doing and why he's doing it. Born in Cody, Wyoming, and moved to New York in 1930 to study painting under Thomas Hart Benton in the Art Students League, right? So he was trained under this kind of classical American artist, right? But he's now doing something radically different, right? As with de Kooning, he worked for the WPA. He discovered alcohol in his 20s and struggled with alcoholism throughout his life. His art can be divided into two periods: binges and recovery. On August 10th, 1956, he drove his car off the road, killing himself and one of the two women with him, right? So he's battling with depression, he's battling with alcoholism, and we see this within his art, right? He's trying to understand himself. Rather than depicting the outer world, Pollock turned inward to represent his inner mind. He felt that studying the mind would help to uncover truths that generally are hidden from the human eye. Very similar to what we see with Freud and Surrealism, right? Different kind of aesthetic, but similar kind of hopes and aspirations of what art can do. His work center on expressing the human psyche, stressing irrationality and anatomical fragments, numbers, and geometric shapes. And so that's just a general overview of what we see within his art. I like this quote by Willem de Kooning. He's taking a look at his peer, Jackson Pollock, and this is what he says about Pollock. He says, "Every so often a painter has to destroy painting. Cezanne did it. Picasso did it with Cubism. Then Pollock did it," right? So these are major artistic shifts within the art world, with Cezanne flattening the canvas, Picasso destroying and fragmenting the canvas, and then Pollock does it again. And each of these artists, after them, art is not going to be the same. And Willem de Kooning saw that. He saw that ability of Jackson Pollock to do something quite new. And so thinking about our ideas of what art is according to some of the big philosophers, right? Aristotle says it has to reflect nature, right? Does that nature have to be the exterior nature, or can it be the interior nature of the mind, right? Greenberg says that art should be forward-thinking and try to do something new that hasn't necessarily been done. Does Jackson Pollock fit that, right? As we think about Tolstoy, it's about communicating ideas, right? That's another thing to think about in terms of Pollock's work. Tarkovitz says that it has to be creating emotion, right? A shock value or some type of emotional response to it. Does it do that, right? So a couple of thoughts to think about, right? Here's another one to think about, right? Reality is abstraction, and abstraction is reality. And I want you to ponder that for a minute and think about what that really is. As we think about wanting art to represent that exterior world, right? As we see with the Renaissance, or art that comes after it, with Baroque and Neoclassicism, Romanticism, all trying to create that sense of that visual reality. Is that not an abstraction, right? They're trying to create reality, but is that reality just another lie, right? Perhaps, right, abstract expressionists are posing this, perhaps their abstraction of reality is a closer representation of what reality actually is, right? Because as we take a look at a painting, right, that's not the actual, whether it's a landscape or whatnot, that's not an actual landscape. It's a representation of landscape. But what abstract expressionists are seeking to do is actually create the emotions, the idea, the feeling behind it, right? And so trying to create a false reality is actually what a lie is, right? So what they're trying to do is get us closer to, at least in their minds, what reality is. I wanted to show you this clip from Jackson Pollock about him in the process, and he's going to describe his art and why his art is important.
I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I go walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting, similar to the Indian fan fingers of the West. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping fluid paint. I also use sand, broken glass, pebbles, string, nails, or other foreign matter. A method of painting is the natural growth out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement. When I am painting, I have a general notion as to what I am about. I can control the flow of the paint. There is no accident, just as there is no beginning and no end. Sometimes I lose the painting, but I have no fear of changes, of destroying the image. Because a painting has a life of its own, I try to let it live.
A couple of thoughts to think about, right? I want you to think about, how does he describe art? What is art to him, right? And how does this fit in with our overarching discussion about what art is, right? How does this fit in with Aristotle? How does it fit in with Tolstoy and Greenberg and Tatargovitz and the like, right? I like this idea that he wants to express feelings rather than illustrate them, right? Rather than trying to get something that's it's an end product, he's just creating his emotions, right? So it's about creation of an idea rather than a representation of an idea, which is a totally different kind of mindset, right? He says that his technique is just a means of arriving at a statement, right? So he's journeying. This is a process, right? And he says that there's no beginning, there's no end, right? But he suggests that his painting also has a life of his own, right? And so as he goes through, and he might, Bob Ross would call him a happy little accident, right? He would suggest his paintings would just kind of evolve, and he lets them evolve into becoming what he's actually unconsciously trying to uncover. And so he would suggest that his accident's not really an accident, it's just an unconscious means to express what he's feeling, and that's what he's really trying to get at, right? I wanted to show you this. This is what he's influenced by, coming from Wyoming, coming from the West. He's influenced by the sand painting. Here you see them, very similar to what Jackson Pollock does, is he puts the canvas on the ground and he drips over it mainly without touching the canvas. He's interested in these Navajo sand painters who just drop the sand to create an image. And we'll watch the whole thing. We'll kind of skip through it. But give you a sense of trying to express the moment, what you're feeling in the moment, like a snapshot or a Polaroid of how you're feeling inside, rather than a snapshot or Polaroid of what the outside looks like, right? A different kind of vantage point, a different kind of starting point for artists to consider. So that's what we see with Jackson Pollock. And as we take a look at this, right, the first thoughts that generally come to mind with people who study Pollock for the first time is that anyone can do that, right? A child can do that. So this is stupid or this is dumb. And one thought that I would have for that is, if you think that, that's fine, but go and try doing it, right? Go and try creating this image and see if it is as easy as you would like to think. Trying to get the paint not to run together is actually a process in and of itself. I actually had a couple of students as I was teaching this about several years ago now, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, who said the same kind of thing, right? Pollock, anybody could do this. And so these two students went out and they tried it, and then they came back and they said that was much harder than I ever thought possible. And so kind of an interesting kind of idea, right? We tend to think of this as not very good art because we think that art has to be something about a great skill that however we define what that great skill is, and we see this, and it's not necessarily visually, right, as a Michelangelo doesn't jump out at us as a great skill, but as then we try to recreate it, we start to understand that there's a little bit more method and technique involved within this. But again, as we think about our exterior world of chaos and confusion, I would ask you, does this not represent that, right? So again, people criticize Pollock because he doesn't look like Michelangelo or Rembrandt, but he's not living in Michelangelo or Rembrandt's age, right? So there's something different about it. So I wonder, if as we take a look at his art, and we're struggling with it, if that more means that we're having a hard time coming to terms with our own age, right? Because a lot of what art is, or art appreciation is our ability to come to it and then take something from it. But what we take from it is going to be determined by what we bring to it, right? So something to kind of consider as we think about this. If we just think that it's going to be stupid, then that's probably what we're going to get from it, right? And as I'm kind of getting back to the Schopenhauer quote, right? If a head and a book collide and one makes a hollow sound, is it always the book, right? So something to consider. And it's hard to demonstrate this with a digital format, right? Without actually taking you to the Museum of Modern Art, where the Autumn Rhythm currently is, and experience that. But this is a student who is at the Museum of Modern Art, and she was just there, kind of like any normal student would be that has been assigned to go to the Museum of Modern Art to experience art. And she had her earbuds in, looking at the floor and not really paying attention to the art around her. Probably thought a lot of this modern art was stupid. And then she walked by this one, and she got about halfway through, and she stopped, and she took a step back, and then she walked all the way to the right-hand side, and then slowly started walking through it, right? As this image caught her mind, something happened within her, right? There's an experience happening. There's a search for discovering. So taking a look at an image like this, we just say, it just looks chaotic and confusing. It's just paint thrown on a canvas, right? But when you're actually in front of it, and you're seeing the texture of the paint, and you're seeing how the paint interacts, right? The colors interacting with one another, the gestures of Pollock, it does invite you in. There is something about it, and it's hard to explain without having you experience it, but that's the point of the art, that it's about the experience. It's about our interaction with it, right? This one is entitled Cathedral, which is kind of an interesting title. When you think about that, it kind of draws to mind kind of religious connotations to it. So this is kind of a quasi-religious, this kind of search for understanding, who am I, why am I here kind of questions, right? Here's another quote by Jackson Pollock. He says, "It seems to me the modern painter cannot express this age, the airplane, the atom bomb, the radio, in the old forms of the Renaissance or any other past culture. Each age finds its own technique. The modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world, in other words, expressing the energy, the motion, and other inner forces. And so each world creates its own art that represents that world, right? And so something to consider as we move forward, right? One critic said, it's easy to describe Pollock on one word, chaos. Absolute lack of harmony, complete lack of structural organization, total absence of technique. And I want you to think about whether you agree with that. I think a lot of people would agree with that, right? It's not necessarily the technique doesn't jump out at us. But does it lack harmony? Is it simply just chaos, right? In some ways, yes. In some ways, it's a search to understand, right? In some ways, as we take a look at particularly in this one, the first colors that we start to see are the reds. And then as our eyes start to adjust, we start to see the swirling motions of the yellow. And we start to wonder if there is an inner rhythm, the inner rhythm of the hand gestures, the color choices that start to come together, right? But the ideas of Pollock is that the work is supposed to be void of imagery, leaving the audience to wonder, to speculate its meaning, but in so doing, we find our own meaning to it. And that's another frustration that a lot of people have with abstract expressionism, is they say, well, what's it supposed to mean, right? What's that one absolute meaning? And maybe it doesn't have one absolute meaning. Maybe what it means for one person, it means something else for another person, right? Because it's mainly our journey to discover, right? And as I mentioned, what we get out of a work is going to depend on what we bring into it. And so each person is going to bring something different into it. This is another work that we see. And again, the main thing that our eyes start to focus on are the yellow gestures, and then they start to settle in, and then all of a sudden the reds start to pop out, right? And then we start to see the blue, we start to see the gray, and we start to have different kind of dimensions to this particular work. And so there might be some more rhythm, there might be some more harmony to a Jackson Pollock than on first appearance. Let's take a look at Barnett Newman. He's another abstract expressionist. I just want to show you a couple other ones to give you a sense of that they're not all exactly the same. They might be doing similar things, but there's also variation within them. Born in New York in 1905, he was educated by his parents, who were Jewish immigrants. He found his love for art as a teen with trips to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, aka the Met, in New York City. After graduating from City College in 1927, he worked at his father's garment factory for 2 years. He was one of the few artists in New York who was not part of the WPA because he was working as a teacher and could not produce the required amount of work. As a result, he felt isolated from the inner art circle of all these other artists coming together and collaborating. He was kind of on the outside of that. His approach to is more rational than Pollock's. Pollock stressed spontaneity, but Newman focuses on structure. He sought to capture the sublime, believing that humanity has lost the ability to feel and needs to reconnect spiritually. And just kind of a brief thought on what the sublime means. The sublime is this high state of emotions, of ecstasy that humans can feel. Within the church, what we would say the sublime would be the spirit, right? This kind of overwhelming sense of inspiration, overwhelming sense of happiness and joy, overwhelming feeling of thought, right, starting to come into us. And so what we see with his works, he's trying to recreate that. He believes that humanity has lost that sublime. We've lost our spirituality, and as a result, we've become very dark and very brutal, right? So again, he's influenced by the Holocaust, he's influenced by the atomic bomb, and that overshadows this age, and he's seeking to try to find a way to correct this in some way. And they're suggesting that the exterior world, the rational mind, has failed us. It led to things like the Holocaust. It led to things like the atomic bomb. And so what they're suggesting is that the rational world is no longer a source for greater insights. What we need to do is focus on the irrational, the ideas within ourselves, right? On the subconscious. So what we see here with One Mint, it has clear indications of the atonement, the Jewish day called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, this idea of becoming one with God. And so the zip represents humanity. And so what you're going to see in most of his works is this kind of stripe down here. And he generally tries to depict a ratio within his works of art that are mathematically precise, even though they don't necessarily appear to be mathematically precise. They are very well focused and thought out. Different from Pollock, who's kind of throwing paint on the canvas in the moment to capture his own search for understanding. The red and brown, what he argues, the red and brown are the color of the earth, the world that we're living in, and the zip is symmetrical to bring order and balance to the painting, what we're seeking to find in this postmodern world of confusion. And the zip, he argues, represents humanity who walks upright, right? So kind of contrasting the red and brown, the earth, right? We're kind of moving forward within the earth. And as I mentioned, the title is a reference to Yom Kippur. Very interested in spirituality and bringing spirituality to art. And he suggests that humanity needs to reconnect with the divine. And so, in a sense, this is a very spiritual, very religious type of work. And we're invited to kind of try to find that reconnection with the divine within there, right? So a thought to consider would be whether or not this could be ever inside a temple, right? Or is this too radical or too abstract for people within the church to be able to understand? Could something like this be within a temple, right? This idea of trying to connect, right? Or not? I don't know. Just a thought to consider. And I wanted to take a look at these two works in tandem, because they have very similar ideas, right? The idea of human beings that are walking vertically, moving forward amid the chaos and confusion, right? This idea of hope, this idea of trying to find direction amidst chaos, right? So again, I want you to think about art separately from one another, right? But I also want you to find the parallels, the similarities between them, right? So what are the similarities and what are the differences? I wanted to leave off our discussion of Barnett Newman with this one, Virhuca Sublimus, which means man, the hero, and the sublime, right? How do we transcend, right? They're looking for heroism, much like what we see with the Renaissance with David. They're looking for what the hero is, but that hero is somewhat changed in the modern world, right? Our socio-historical, political circumstances have changed what that meaning is, right? But the idea is to recreate the sublime, to engulf the viewer, right? The postmodern world has lost the ability to find the sublime, as Hume argued, and this has led to feelings of anger, aggression, and violence. And I want you to think about whether that's true, right? Have we lost the sublime? Have we lost spirituality today? And can our, tendencies or propensities towards anger, aggression, and violence that we've seen, particularly within the last 2 years, be the reason for that loss of spirituality? Right? And what we see is that Newman, whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with it, this is the medium to do it, this is his search to find spirituality, to try to find a way for humanity to reconnect in this postmodern world of confusion. And this is just an individual standing in front of it at the Museum of Modern Art to give you this sense of size, right? But again, it's inviting us to try to find our own meaning, right? Newman has a little bit more kind of focus to it, a little bit more, the Yom Kippur, the titles mean a little bit more. The zip means, humanity. So there's a little bit more, purposeful implementations within Barnett Newman's work that we need a little bit more context with. But it's the same kind of idea that Pollock has to invite us in to discover where we are, what we need to reconnect with, to feel greater sense of happiness and to avoid those frustrations and anger and violent tendencies that we tend to have. I wanted to leave off with Mark Rothko, just to give you another example of an abstract expressionist, to see what other ideas are out there and how artists are approaching this. Born in Russia in 1903, his family immigrated to the United States when he was 10. His family settled in Portland, Oregon. He attended Yale from 1921 to 1923 on a scholarship. He then moved to New York City. He essentially taught himself how to paint by attending art shows and becoming familiar with his contemporaries. His first works were visual representations of the sadness and emptiness of the modern urban world. However, in the 1930s, he became influenced by the Surrealist and Jungian theories, which explored the collective unconscious, which other artists are seeking to do, right? Ideas that all humans share. And he gravitated toward abstract expressionism. And what we see within his works are this, right? Similar to, Jackson Pollock, this idea that there's nothing necessarily discernible. There's no faces or dogs or skies or, clouds, trees that are represented. It's just colors. But similar to Barnett Newman, is that they have these sense of shapes to them, right? I like the quotes. I wanted to read these quotes to have you kind of work through his works. He says, a painting is not a picture of an experience, but is the experience, right? And so that gets back to the idea of abstraction is reality, right? Reality is abstraction, and abstraction is reality, right? This is about the experience, not about a representation of the experience, which is a totally different mindset, right? Here's what he says. He says, you've got sadness and you have got sadness in me, and my works of art are places where the two sadnesses can meet, and therefore both of us need to feel less sad. This idea of connection, right? This idea of art not being a fixed end where you just kind of paint it and put it in a museum and that's it. It's about us coming in and feeling and connecting, right? He says, I'm not an abstractionist. I am not interested in the relationship of color or form or anything else. I'm interested only in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom. And if you are moved only by their color relationships, then you've missed the point, right? His works are not necessarily just about the color. They're about these larger overarching themes about what it means to be a human being within this modern world of confusion and violence, right? How do we push past that, right? How do we find connections in a world that feels disconnected? He's suggesting that his arts are a medium for us to be able to find those connections with one another. And again, as you see this, you're just like, okay, maybe it's just, rust and blue, right? Brown, blue, and brown on blue. And you say, well, that's just, it's just paint on a canvas, right? But when you stand in front of it, there's something that happens. I don't want to necessarily say it's completely spiritual, but there is that element that could be there, right? This emotional quality that's there. He says, the people who weep before my pictures are having the same religious experience I had when I painted them, right? So there is this deep kind of journey, this self-reflection that's happening. Very similar to what we see the deep introspection with Rembrandt and all the self-portraits. We see that within Rothko, right? And it's, again, hard to get that on a digital image, but I encourage you to go and see one and test that out, right, to see if that actually happens, right? He says, I want to eliminate all obstacles between the painter and the idea, and between the idea and the observer, by removing such things as history, memory, and geometry, right? All these rational thoughts that cloud our minds. He wants to remove all of that because those can be false. Those can be tainted. We can have false understandings about the world around us. But what we need to focus on, rather than the false ideas, are the true ones, right? These emotions, what connects us as human beings, those are the true ideas. He says, for while the authority of the doctor or plumber is never questioned, everyone deems himself a good judge and an adequate arbiter of what a work of art should be and how it should be done. I think that's a good to keep in mind for critics of all art, right? Everyone thinks that they're the art critic. Everyone thinks that art should conform to their own mental constructs. But maybe not. maybe there's more going on. Maybe we need to understand the larger artistic discussion before we actually jump in and start judging it, right? That's where context comes in. That's where studying comes in. For instance, I wouldn't just automatically jump into a chemistry discussion, start discussing, the chemical compositions and what they should be, right? That would be way out of my depth. And so we might need to have a similar kind of parameters as we think about, who actually is or should be judging art. Maybe we need to have a little bit more understanding of what's going on beneath the surface. Where does art come from? What are artists trying to do? We might need more discussion. I think that's what he's arguing with in that quote. And then Houston asked him to create art for a chapel, a non-denominational chapel that anybody can go into. And again, what they felt is that Rothko had, this kind of spirituality within his art, that you can just sit there and contemplate and think. And I know that it seems kind of odd for a painting to do that. But art can have tremendous emotional impacts. It can have tremendous spiritual impacts on us. And so thinking about art in a new way, right? That's what he's trying to do within his art, is to try to find those connections between what he's searching for and what we're searching for. We're generally all searching for the same thing. We're all searching for the idea of truth and this idea of connection. And so he's trying to make his art to be a better means of doing that. All right, in conclusion, right, existentialism seeks to understand the meaning of life, and as New York became the center of the art world, existentialism influenced the newly developing artistic thought. Abstract expressionism captures existentialism's lack of certainty. We'll take a look at existentialism in a little bit, and rejection of finding meaning through conventional means. Rather than looking for truth in the outer world, artists turn to self-reflection and introspection to understand the self. To existentialists, truth is not necessarily an end goal. It is a process of discovery. Truth is a journey, not a destination. Abstract expressionists borrow these ideas. Meaning should be found in the artist's and viewer's pursuit of truth. That's what we're all looking for. Additionally, the rational mind creates things like genocide and atomic warfare. Thus, art should not be rational. It should find ways to help awaken the irrational, emotional, and spiritual forces within. And if we could do that, maybe we can unlock these, or find a way through these dark tendencies that we generally tend to have. And so this is a way of understanding the world, right, that they find themselves in. Art is a means to be able to do this. It's deeply intellectual, deeply philosophical, to try to understand who am I, where am I going, where do I come from, and what's the meaning of it all, right? And so we see abstract expressionists, even though their works might not necessarily seem to do that to the novice on first glance. When we start to understand what's going on below the surface of their art, behind the ideas of the artist, what they're seeking to do, as we stand in front of it and interact with it, we can find that there's a lot more going on than we might initially think.